Welcome to This Birding Life, a podcast for birdwatchers everywhere. I'm your host, Bill Thompson III. This Birding Life comes to you from the friendly confines of Birdwatchers Digest, where in 2017 and 18 we're celebrating 40 years of publishing great content for birders. Sample our smorgasbord of content at birdwatchersdigest.com. This Birding Life is sponsored by three wonderful and wise organizations. Carl Zeiss Sports Optics. They are makers of the amazing Victory SF binocular and the new and equally amazing Harpia spotting scope. Join the Zeiss community of birders at facebook.com/ZeissBirding. Cork Expeditions is the leader in polar adventures. They've partnered with Noah Strycker for a brand new birding expedition sailing from South Georgia to Cape Verde. Noah will act as a field guide and an onboard lecturer as passengers explore some of the world's most remote islands in search of rare and endemic birds. Learn more at corkexpeditions.com. Finally, the American Birding Expo is your opportunity to experience the world of birding in one place. Next September 21 to 23, 2018, in Oaks, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. More than 125 exhibitors from all over the world and from every corner of the birding market will be there. Learn more at birdingexpo.com. Now on to our episode. This is episode 76, Noah Stricker's Big Year. Noah Strycker is a 31-year-old writer, photographer, and birdman based near Eugene, Oregon. In 2015, during a quest spanning 41 countries and all 7 continents, Noah set a world record by seeing 6,042 species of birds, which is more than half the birds on Earth, in one single calendar year. Noah is the author of 3 books: The Thing with Feathers, about the relationships between birds and human behavior; Among Penguins, which describes a summer he spent in an Antarctic field camp; and the book we're going to talk about today, Birding Without Borders, his personal account of his world big year. Noah is an onboard ornithologist for expeditions to Antarctica and the high Arctic, and he's traveled to the Earth's polar regions more than 30 times, which must be some sort of record. And he's fascinated by birds of high latitudes. He's worked in many places on field research projects in Ecuador, Costa Rica, Panama, Australia, the Farallon Islands, Hawaii, Michigan, Florida, and Maine. Here is my conversation with world-traveling birdman Noah Strycker. All right, welcome to This Birding Life to Noah Strycker. Hey Noah, how's it going?
Hey Bill, it's going great.
Well, you've been back among us for a while here in the United States, in your home state of Oregon, but you spent a year doing what many people have dreamt of doing or fantasized about doing, traveling around the world, trying to see as many birds as possible. You set a world record. I just finished reading your book, Birding Without Borders. Fantastic job on that, and very compelling. I'm going to get to the book in a second, but I want to start where it started for you, and I'd like you to tell our listeners how you first got fired up about birds, Noah.
Oh, for me, it goes way back. When I was about 11 in elementary school, in the 5th grade, I went to a smaller school here in Eugene, Oregon, and my teacher, a woman named Judy Kapler, put a bird feeder on our classroom window. You know those plastic bird feeders that suction cup right to the glass?
Oh, yeah.
And she'd stop class every time a new bird showed up and make us try to identify it. And I thought this was pretty cool. We had like lazuli buntings and evening grosbeaks and purple finches coming right up to the window just a couple feet away. And she had a backyard birds poster next to it where we could try to match up the birds, and that got me going. I will say all the other kids in that class thought this was about the dumbest thing ever.
Sure, right.
But I went back home, and my mom and dad are not birders, and I said, Dad, we need to build some bird houses. And he was like, what? But he thought it was a great project. And my mom and dad have about 20 acres of forest outside of Eugene. So we've always had lots of birds around the yard, and that helped a lot too.
Well, yeah, and I would say with a classroom bird list like that it's a pretty good chance that you're going to get fired up. Those are some great birds to have right outside your classroom window.
Oh, yeah. We had western bluebirds nesting on our campus and band-tailed pigeons flying around. And it was a good place to start.
Yeah. And so speaking of school and birds, you've went on then to do quite a bit of work, I would assume, in college, and then afterwards you did a lot of field work studying birds, right? So some ornithological field work.
Yeah, so one project leads to the next. Birding is a slippery slope, as you well know.
Oh yeah.
And so I started attending meetings of the local birding group in Eugene once a month, and they were delighted to have this 11-year-old kid showing up. And so some local birders started taking me under their wing and inviting me out on field trips and that kind of thing. And I got sucked into the harder core crowd of birders around Eugene. And academically, I mean, even in college at Oregon State, which has an amazing bird faculty, they only offered, I think, two bird-related classes, systematics of birds and biology of birds. And so I specialized as much as I could when I was studying fisheries and wildlife science there with a minor in fine art. But birds for me have often been more out of the academic sphere and kind of on my own.
Okay. But then you did go and do post college research,
Yeah,
right?
so I took a year off between high school and college, and that's when I did some of my first field work. I called up a refuge called Malheur in Eastern Oregon, which is now famous for being occupied by a militia a couple years
Right,
ago.
right. You didn't have
It's
anything to do with that, did you, Noah?
no, thankfully no.
Okay.
And got signed up with a bird research project in Panama that year. I spent a couple months searching for bird nests around Pipeline Road, and then every summer during college, I worked on Project Puffin in Maine for a summer and learned how to band birds and did some banding projects. And then after I graduated, I realized I could start doing this kind of field work full time, seasonally. And the first thing I did right after I graduated was got dumped in a remote field camp in Antarctica studying penguins for 2.5 months.
Yeah.
and, and then did field work like that for several years after.
So was it in those lonely 24-hour dark nights in Antarctica? I don't know when you were there actually, but was it there that you started hatching the idea for this big around the world adventure?
Well, in birding, big years are kind of a tradition, and so I've always known about big years ever since I read Kingbird Highway, Ken Kaufman's book, when I was younger. That really inspired me, and so it's always been an idea. But I don't know when the idea of a global big year first hit me several years ago, anyway, and it's been this thought in the back of my mind. I never thought that I'd actually be the one to do it, but I always thought it would be something that somebody should go out there and do.
One of the neatest things that I saw, and the book is Birding Without Borders: An Obsession, a Quest, and the Biggest Year in the World, and it's published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. So one of the most interesting images in the book, well, two of them I'll say, is one is you standing next to the stack of field guides that you scanned in, so that you would have all the identification ability of a field guide without all the weight. And the second is the tiny little pack that you traveled with around the world. Can can you give us some insight into those two things?
Well, the packing list was mostly inspired by backpacking adventures. I've done a lot of backpacking in the Pacific Northwest over the past few years. And in 2011, I hiked the entire Pacific Crest Trail, which goes all the way from the Mexican border up through California,
Oh,
Oregon, and
nice.
Washington up to Canada. That took me about 4 months of hiking every day, averaging like 22 miles a day. It's about 2,600 plus miles. And when you're doing that kind of backpacking, every ounce matters. I met people who had shaved down the handles of their toothbrushes and only use one piece of floss and
Oh
go to
yeah.
extreme lengths to not carry as much weight as they could manage. And so for that trip, I didn't carry a stove when I was hiking. I just ate cold food, and I only took like one pair of underwear. And so I was pretty extreme, but not quite the toothbrush shaving extreme.
Sure.
And the packing list for traveling the world and birding is remarkably similar to what you take when you're walking through the woods. You need the same basic things for survival, and just instead of a tent and a sleeping bag, I took my binoculars and a laptop.
Right. Yeah, and did you find on your trip, was there anything you wished you'd brought, or anything you thought, boy, I really didn't need to bring that?
Um, let's see. I shed a couple of things toward the beginning. I There were some things that were overkill. Uh, Water purification tablets, for instance. I found that you can really find fresh water pretty much anywhere you go.
Yeah, in bottles,
And
right?
right,
Yeah.
there were some tweaks here and there, but I did pretty well with the packing list, I think, from the beginning. I went very, very tidy and small. I bought a 40-liter backpack from REI, which is small enough that you can put it under the seat of any airplane, so I would never have to check any luggage. And I think that spoiled me for life now. On any trip I go on, I'm never going to check anything if I can help it because it's so nice to not have to deal with it.
It is, and you're faster out of the airport, and it is good if you can do that. I find it pretty much impossible. I'm a little bit of a pack rat person, so I always bring more than I need. So I was very impressed with your light little pack and the bare essentials that you took. So you started the big year in a hot tub with a bottle of champagne and some other naturalists sitting in Antarctica on a ship. And
Yeah.
was your heart racing at that moment? It's very well told in the book how you started the whole year off. But describe that moment for our listeners.
Well, I've been working for a couple of years as an onboard bird expert on expedition trips to Antarctica. So I've been to Antarctica a bunch of times now, and I figured, well, if I'm going to see the whole world, then I might as well include Antarctica, especially because I have this personal connection. And unfortunately, Antarctica to get there takes a while. So the only way I could really swing it, including it in this big year, was to get down there before the year started so that I would only have to cross the Drake Passage once getting back to South America, and it wouldn't take all these extra days. So
Right.
on January 1st, at the stroke of midnight, I was there in Antarctica on this Russian ship, which had a hot tub on the outer deck. And I had this grand plan to spot my first bird of the year from the hot tub. And I invited a couple of friends, and we were there for the stroke of midnight and had the bottles of champagne like a NASCAR race or something. And then uh, 20 minutes passed and it got really cold and we couldn't see any birds at all. And everybody vacated the hot tub. It kind of went wrong. I had to stay up till 3 o'clock that morning by myself on the outer deck, half tipsy on champagne, to wait for a Cape Petrel to finally fly by and be my official first bird of the year.
So really, if you wanted to be totally nuts about it, you could start the big year 3 hours in and then add 3 hours later. But you didn't do that.
No, you got to start at midnight. It's one calendar year. This ended up being kind of an issue actually at the end of the year because I started in Antarctica and then there was some question, well, when does the big year officially finish? Does it finish in the same time zone that you start in or in the same time zone that you end in? And I ended up in India at the very end of the year. So if it was going to be exactly 365 days from when I started, I could have technically kept birding until about 10 o'clock in the morning on January 1st. But that didn't feel right either. I mean, it's got to be until midnight. So my year was actually 364 and a half days.
Right. Well, good for you for taking it, taking it so seriously right there at the end. And you actually you wanted to set the record to see the most birds, but you also had a personal milestone that you wanted to hit.
Yeah, the existing big year world record was Ruth Miller and Alan Davies, a couple of British birders who I have not met, but one day I hope to go birding with them somewhere. In 2008, they did a bunch of birding and ended up with 4,341 species, according to the Clements checklist at that time. And so that was the number to beat. I kind of looked at what they had done and what I thought was possible, and I set my own goal to be 5,000 birds. And nobody quite knew what I'd end up with. It was interesting. People were taking bets at the beginning, like, well, is it going to be 4,000? Is it going to be 7,000? Nobody
Right.
had much idea.
No, neither did you.
No, I thought 5,000 was attainable. And so that seemed like a nice round number to go for.
Yeah. And where were you when you hit 5,000?
I got to 5,000 in the Philippines actually in late October, so I still had 2 full months left in the year when I reached my goal. And the 5,000th bird was this little tiny endemic bird on Mindanao Island called the flame-crowned flower pecker, which
Hmm.
seemed like a nice one for a milestone.
Right. Yeah. And and then you continued on, and of course, really moved the bar, raised the bar super high, passing 6,000.
Yeah, that totally exceeded my wildest dreams when I first set out to get past 6,000 birds. Um, it just it came down to the final couple days of the year. At the end, I was over 5,900 when I was in Australia, and figured, well, I've already exceeded my original goal by almost 1,000, but it would be criminal to come so close to 6,000 and not quite get there. So there was this mad scramble at the end. I ended up flying back to India from Australia after Christmas Day at the last minute, unplanned, to go to the Assam province in northeast India to try to track down a few last birds, because that's the one place I figured I could go back to at that point and see the most species that I had missed, which was probably a strategic error on my part when I was in India the first time in September.
Yeah, but I thought it was cool the calculus that you did there, where you're thinking like, okay, I could go to Cuba, that's going to take a while. I could go, can't remember where else you were thinking about going, but you're in Australia and you had to get to Perth to fly out, and you're thinking, oh, India is a possibility, and that's the one you took, kind of because not only did it have the max birds, but like it was logistically easier. Is that right?
It was a little tricky. I was literally making these plans on Christmas Day in the middle of nowhere in Australia
Mhm.
with a guy named Frank O'Connor in Perth, who I was birding with that day. And luckily, eBird had just introduced that new feature target species in
Yeah,
2015, which let me do these calculations for all these different places, because I had realized at that point I couldn't get to 6,000 in Australia, maybe if I had a few weeks, but not in a few more days.
right.
And so there were a few places. Guyana, I could have picked up a few more.
That's right.
Ethiopia was probably a big miss for me this year. It just didn't work out logistically. And India turned out to be the one spot I could felt like I could get to. I could get the visa in one day and book the international plane tickets for the following day and actually be able to reach it in time. And I'd already connected with some young birders in India. This guy named Ramit Singhal, who's 24 years old, was super enthusiastic. And so I called him up and said, hey, can I come back to India? And do you want to invite a couple friends? And so that we put together this last minute group to go hard until New Year.
That's awesome. Well, and speaking of eBird and the wondrous electronic age that we live in, that seemed to have quite an impact on your ability and anyone else's ability to do a big year, because we have so much more information and like logistical power at our fingertips. Is it,
eBird is amazing. It is revolutionizing birding. It's addicting to use it and it's fun to use it, but the amount of information that's in eBird now, I mean, not just for the US, but worldwide, it's international. I think there's nothing else out there quite like it. And for me, during my big year, it was a godsend because it literally would give you a target list for anywhere that you were going to go, saying what to look for and where you could possibly find it. And so before I got to each new country and connected with the local birders there, I would use eBird to spit out a target list, and I'd forward that ahead of time, and the birders would be going through it before I even arrived, figuring out a good route to hit the maximum efficiency. So eBird was extremely useful.
yeah, yeah, and it seems like the perfect tool for a large adventure like this to like you say, to be able to know ahead of time. I mean, imagine, you know, you think about some of the Peter Alden and some of the Jim Clement, some of the people that did big years, big, world big years before. I mean, they didn't have these tools to be in the right place for the right birds at the right time.
It's amazing how technology affects birding so much, which at its core is this very offline analog activity out there in nature. And yet how people are connecting with each other through the internet and and eBird and optics and all the rest has changed the game just even in the past 10 years or so. I don't think this big year would have been possible in remotely the same way 15 or 20 years ago because of all the things that have changed since then. And so I think I had good timing with doing this global big year. I think world birding right now is at a point where domestic birding within the United States was, say, in the 1970s when Ken Kaufman was doing his big trip around the U.S.
Right. Yeah, and the lane bird finding guides were sort of coming out, and it was becoming known that there was a community of birders, and there were basically routes to certain hotspots that you could do. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, and bird watching has really taken off in a lot of these different countries just recently. Places like China and other Asian countries and South American countries. There's all these birding groups and birding clubs in various places that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago, and now it's getting to be quite popular.
Yeah. So, what's the total number of times that you did laundry during your big year?
uh, well, I had an extra pair of underwear, so I swapped them, back and forth. I did laundry in the sink as much as I could when I could stay awake that long. A lot of my hosts, I would stay at people's houses, and so they'd let me do
Oh,
laundry. So
that's
it wasn't as
nice.
bad as you might expect. But, birding in the tropics, you get kind of sweaty out there in the jungle. And so that got to be kind of an issue in a couple of spots.
I was gonna say, like when they picked you up in South Africa, and your host there was like, let's take you to the hotel to freshen up.
That was very nice of him.
No, I can just imagine. I mean, it's like the old school of thought that you can get 4 days out of a pair of underpants.
Oh,
Inside
yeah,
out, backwards, and
exactly.
all right. So I'm going to ask you some questions for the sort of the more hardcore bird people out there. What would you say? I mean, this is sort of a speed round thing, Noah. What would you say were your top three birds that you were so thrilled about? I mean, one of them has to be that owl that you got
Ooh,
in
yeah,
on New Britain.
golden masked owl.
Yep.
Hadn't been seen alive in about 30 years before 2015. That was definitely a huge highlight. I like the big, spectacular birds too. The harpy eagle in Brazil was definitely up there. The cassowary in Australia was right up there. I really love this bird in the Philippines called the Palawan peacock pheasant.
Oh, that's
Just
an
a
awesome bird.
crazy forest pheasant
Yeah,
that is quite spectacular. I don't know. I could run down a list of 50
I
probably. It's
bet.
hard to pick favorites.
I bet. And what would you say is your biggest miss?
Well, the most common bird that I never saw was probably the spotted redshank,
Okay.
Eurasian shorebird that's all over. I just never found one, kind of strangely. But the miss that hurt the most was, again, in the Philippines. I looked for the Philippine eagle on Mindanao Island and spent almost a whole day staking this thing out. And finally, in the far distance, we saw, I was with a couple other birders there, a raptor circling on a thermal, which was exactly our search image, and it had a very flat profile, large body. The other guys were like, well, that's it. That's got to be the Philippine eagle. There's nothing else that bird could be, but it was a couple miles away. All I could see was a little speck, and I was like,
Yeah.
there's no way I personally could identify that, much less count it as the world's most spectacular raptor. And so the Philippine eagle was left off my list.
Yeah, well, that's probably the legit way to handle that. I took that trip with Nikki up Mount Kidden and we got to see the Philippine eagle. In fact, there's an earlier episode of this podcast where I talk about coming down myself from the mountain and getting lost in a torrential rainstorm, and
Oh,
and
nice.
being panicked that like because the separatist guerrillas had camps around, and we saw
Yeah, it's a
smoke from a
sort of
couple of their camps. So,
sketchy place.
but what a bird! I mean, we were lucky because we had a staked out nest. That kitten glad nest was, it's pretty reliable if you could make the hike up. But it was neat too to know several of the people that you were talking to and that you were meeting. Hugo from Guatemala was a very dear friend of mine. I'd been birding with him many times. I was touched to see your kind words about him in the book too.
Yeah, that was so tragic. and had interviewed Hugo for Birding Magazine, but I'd never met him in
Hmm.
person. And we've been communicating and set up this birding trip together. And then I was in Costa Rica and hadn't heard from him, and I was supposed to be birding with him in another week or two down the road, and finally realized that he passed away in a car accident, and that just it was kind of like running into a brick wall of reality there all of a sudden.
It kind of puts things in perspective too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. Well, any adventures that did not make the book that you could slip to us here on This Birding Life? Anything that happened that Al, you just couldn't fit it in, or
Oh yeah. If I added up all of the daily blog posts that I was keeping on the Audubon Society's website throughout the year, just kind of like the short version of I went here today and saw this bird. By the end of the year, those blog posts totaled twice the length of the book. So the book itself is just the highlights. It was kind of frustrating, actually, not to be able to include all the other stuff. But if I had just one chapter for every country, even, it would be 1,000 pages long, I calculated.
oh my gosh, yeah,
I
but
think one of the top places that I just couldn't quite work in was I spent 3.5 weeks in Colombia. That was the longest amount of time I spent in any one country during the year. In the book, it's only got a couple of sentences kind of in passing reference, but Colombia was amazing. I saw 750 species of birds there. I got to go to the Santa Marta Mountains and see all the endemics there, the dry Caribbean lowlands, and all the way up into the mountains and the Interandean valleys and West Slope and East Slope, and met some amazing birders there. So Colombia is one place I'd really like to go back to.
yeah, that, between Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, that whole region there is so rich, so biodiverse, and
You could spend a lifetime in South America alone, or even northwestern South America, and not see everything.
right. What was the best bird name of all the bird names you encountered during the year? What would you say was one of the favorite weird bird names?
I like in Indonesia the satanic nightjar, otherwise known as the diabolical nightjar. Unfortunately, I couldn't go looking for it because the trail that it lived on was being occupied by Al Qaeda terrorists in the jungle.
Yeah,
So it seemed kind of fitting, actually.
that'll put you off a little bit. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you talked about trying to get through. I think you were trying to get into Jamaica, and you were having trouble because you couldn't list your exact destination, and you wrote Birdman on your what was it, your immigration form, and that seemed to just get you right through. You seem to really not encounter that many hassles in crossing, border to border.
I did learn that when you're filling out immigration forms, you need to fill in every blank, no matter how ridiculous your answer may be. I never knew where I was going to be staying any given night because I was always meeting local people, and we'd often be at their house somewhere. But the immigration official really wants to see something on your, address. So when I came in and waded through the immigration lines, there's often these ads for luxury hotels in that room that you can look at as you're waiting. And so I just copied down the address of the most fantastical 5-star resort I could find on an ad, and they'd never look twice at it. And then under occupation, I had been putting writer for a long time, but for some reason, people are suspicious of writers in many ways. I think they think you're a journalist or something. And so they'd always ask me these searching questions. And finally, I just started writing Birdman, and nobody ever said a word about it. I think they just think it's too ridiculous. You couldn't possibly make that up.
Yeah, they don't want to open that can of worms.
That's right.
Exactly. Then you'll spend the next 4 hours telling them bird stories, like because that's what we do as bird watchers.
That's right.
That's hilarious. Well, are you traveled out? I mean, you just got
No
back from
way.
Antarctica again, right?
Yeah, I spent another 3 weeks in Antarctica. I just got home last week, and I'm headed back down there actually in March for another Atlantic Odyssey trip, again with Quark Expeditions. It starts in Ushuaia, Argentina, but then goes east and north through all the remote Atlantic islands. It's a kind of repositioning trip. So it'll go to the Falklands, South Georgia, Tristan da Cunha, which I've always wanted
Oh
to
my
visit,
gosh, no
St.
way.
Helena, Ascension Island, and Cape Verde at the end.
Wow. That sounds like a really exciting adventure.
That's going to be a 33-day voyage, of which 20 of them are sea days. So it's going to be a lot of seabirding. But we could find 50 species of tube noses on that one trip. So it'll be pretty cool.
Wow. Okay, so it'd be kind of a big tube nose adventure.
Yep. And Tristan da Cunha, is the world's most remote inhabited island. It's 1,500 miles from the nearest neighbor and doesn't have an airstrip, so it's kind of hard to get to. There's a community of people that live there, I guess of Scottish descent. There's several hundred people in a city that's official name is the Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, which has got to be the best city name in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And they just live on this volcano in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which erupted in the 1960s, and the entire population was evacuated back to the UK for 2 full years, at which point the volcano stopped erupting and all of them decided to go back. So they're all back there living again.
Wow, making that.
Sounds like a pretty crazy place.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to get a haggis there, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm interested to meet some of the locals. I guess they all have the same 7 last names.
Oh, okay. Well, no comment there. So, Noah, so that's your next sort of big birding adventure. You have any other books in the works?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a new book now with National Geographic. I don't know if you've seen the first issue of 2018 of Nat Geo just came out, the magazine, and it's got a cover article by Jonathan Franzen called "Why Birds Matter." There's a little ad in that article for my book with them. It's going to be called "Birds of the Photo Ark" because it's a part of a larger project with a National Geographic photographer named Joel Sartori, who's got this awesome project called the Photo Ark, where he's documenting birds and other animals, and mostly in zoos and captive breeding facilities, where he sets up a portrait studio and tries to get these amazingly intimate portraits of animals. So this will be a bird book with amazing images of birds, kind of like a photo essay book, and I'm writing short essays that'll be throughout. So that'll come out in early March, Birds of the Photo Ark.
Well, we'll anticipate that greatly. Noah, it's been always a pleasure to talk to you. We've run into each other in some rather interesting places, and
That's right.
hope we get to do that again. The book is Birding Without Borders, and Noah Strycker is the author, worldwide adventurer, and all-around great guy. Noah, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Bill. This was fun.
Okay, one last thing. If people want to catch up on your blogs from during your big year, or they want to keep up track of you now, where can they go?
My website, noahstrycker.com, Strycker, has all my event schedule and upcoming talks and that kind of thing. And all of the blog posts from the big year are still archived on the Audubon's website. So if you just go to audubon.org and look for Birding Without Borders on there, you can start at the beginning and read every single day from all of 2015.
Super. Well, Noah, thanks again, and best of luck to you with your upcoming adventures and your upcoming projects. We'll look forward to hearing all about them down the road.
Okay, I'll see you soon, I'm sure.
All right, take care, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Special thanks to Noah for speaking with us today. You can try to catch up with what Noah is doing, and good luck with that, by visiting his website, noahstrycker.com. That's NOAHSTRYCKER.com. Thanks, and happy 40th anniversary to Birdwatchers Digest, the magazine for birders who love to read and readers who love to bird. Learn more at birdwatchersdigest-digital.com. Carl Zeiss Sports Optics is a longtime This Birding Life sponsor. They also make top-flight optics for birding. You can join the Zeiss community of birders at facebook.com/ZeissBirding. Quark Expeditions is the leader in polar adventures, offering unparalleled access to the most remote parts of the globe. Learn more at quarkexpeditions.com. The American Birding Expo is the world of birding in one place. Join us this fall in Philadelphia and experience the birding lifestyle for yourself. birdingexpo.com. That's it for this episode, folks. Please subscribe to the RSS feed so you won't miss a single one. And send us your comments to editor@birdwatchersdigest.com. That reaches me, Bill Thompson III. Until next time, thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you out there with the birds. Laters!